You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 94.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Vias.
We tend to think in black and white when it comes to relationships. Either we have a relationship with someone or it's over and it's done, as if those are the only two options. The way that we think about the relationship is the way that it is, and that if something changes, then something needs to be done about it. We need to break up the friendship, romantic relationship, whatever it is. And I wanted to do another episode on benching, especially since the last two episodes I talked about benching in a personal situation that was happening, and then I talked about desperation, and they kind of go hand in hand. And I wanted to circle back to this notion after having some conversations with some friends, is that we think that we then need to set boundaries in a relationship, or something's gone wrong when benching occurs, or all of these slang terms. We talk about ghosting, breadcrumbing, and things like that. So basically, you are in a familiar pattern in your relationship, whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship, a familiar pattern of communicating, and all of it, and then it changes. Somebody decides not to respond to messages. They are not as frequent as they were. So let's say you were texting a few times a week, it changes to a few times in once a month or something like that. When communication patterns, or you feel a shift in the relationship, that shift is not coming from the frequency of their messages or how often they're interacting with you. There is a factual thing. You text 3 times a week, and then now you get a text once a month. That's the facts. And then that emotion, that shift that you're feeling, is coming from some sort of thinking you're having, like something's wrong in the relationship, or maybe I did something wrong, or something's not right. Maybe something's wrong, something's happened with that person, and all of a sudden you have this emotion, even though the facts are still the same. And what I want to offer you is that in some relationships, you might not even notice that the frequency of the communication has changed, because you're not thinking that, oh, this communication means something. We've attached meaning to the number of texts per day, per week that we receive from somebody, or the number of messages that were received for someone. We attach certain meaning and define our relationship based on that. So I want to bring it back to benching or ghosting, or when somebody's communication has stopped for periods of time with you, and maybe you're not even seeing them, etc. So there is this feeling you have that you're getting from how you're viewing the changes in communication. And usually when we start to notice this kind of negative emotion, is that we tend to then say, well, this relationship is done. I need to send a boundary. It's no more. It's done. And what we do in that situation is we've created two options, as if there's only one way to be in a relationship with somebody. It had to be this number of messages per week, or this amount of communication with that person, and it can't be something else, as if there is only one kind of form to a relationship. And what I want you to kind of think about is that when we create a form to a certain kind of friendship, let's say a good friend, we check in with each other at the minimum once a week. That is our script for how we define a good friendship. That is what we have created in our mind as good friend or acquaintance. Is we have attached this kind of script that we see each other this many times a year, or we communicate this many times a year, that those are all scripts that we've created that has helped us, served us to a certain point, but then in the end doesn't serve us when things don't go our way. So when you think of relationships in different forms, let's say you have a friend that you speak to 3 times a week, and then you're now speaking to them once a month. that form of the relationship is changing. And instead of it being, no, this friendship is done, I'm setting a boundary, I don't want to talk to this person anymore because they're not responding to my messages, it's an opportunity to think of the friendship in a different form and not cut off everybody and say no to everybody. And this is something that was my default setting. I would automatically kind of say no when things changed in a relationship, as if this change was going to be bad, or as if it signified that this friendship was failing, this relationship was failing. When there was an option to think of a different form of the friendship. It could be, I have a friend where we communicated 3 times a week, and now I have a friend where we just check in with each other once a month. And the form of that communication has changed, and the friendship can still remain and exist in this form. And that script that we have for relationships is, in fact, how we have relationships in our minds. Relationships are created how we think about that other person. And part of it is how we think of how that relationship should be carried out. There should be this many visits. There should be this type of communication. And all of that is constructed in our mind. And it's in our own mind because somebody else's mind has a different way, a different idea of what a relationship should be like, how it should be carried out. And so you can notice that each person defines a relationship in their mind. So all relationships are created in our mind. So if that's the case, then you can create different relationships in your head, and you can change the form of that relationship to, okay, we used to text 3 times a week, and now we're communicating once a month. Or we used to visit each other every holiday, and now we're visiting each other every other year. And it can take on these different forms, and it can be still a relationship instead of a black and white situation where there's one form, there's one way of being in a relationship, and there is no relationship then. And this is a very hard thing for our brains to do because our brains want to go and make everything organized and clean. So it likes to think of things in a very dichotomous way, that either there's this relationship or the relationship is over. So it's even more of a challenge for us to think about relationships in different forms, that now the relationship is in this form as opposed to what I thought about that. Because all of us come with this construct of what a friend is, what a good friend is, what an acquaintance is, and when that's challenged or when something changes, it feels really uncomfortable, and we as humans don't want to be uncomfortable. So it does become a challenge to think about relationships in different forms, that they can take on different ways, and it doesn't have to be a clear, I'm not going to be in this relationship anymore. And what is the benefit of even doing that? The thing about that is that it grows you as a person. It grows you in relationships. It's a better feeling than to say, oh, this person is out of my life because they changed their communication with me, or anything like that. Because the person still remains in your life, in your head. And if you're having such a negative response to, I don't want to see that person, I don't want contact anymore, I'm going to cut them out of my life, they're still in your head, and they're in your head in a very negative way. And when you can shift into, oh, maybe the relationship is in a different form, maybe I can be open to a different way of being in a relationship with that person, even if it's minimally communicating with them or not how you want it, it tends to be, you tend to, at the end of that, have more of, quote unquote, what you call closure, more of what you have decided for yourself as closure. Okay, this is the form, and I can feel better about this form. I can work towards this form, rather than having it be a super negative experience where I don't want this person in my life anymore. And that doesn't mean that that's never an option, or you don't exercise that option of not communicating with that person and saying no to them. But when that's our go-to reaction, we miss so much of an opportunity to learn about what relationships mean to us. And we miss so much of accepting that other person, which all of those kind of emotions, in the end, they are very positive emotions. And not that we can't have negative emotions, but they are positive. And that when we opt for kind of this dichotomous way, notice how you feel that relationship carries negative weight in your mind. And if that's the space that you want to be in a long-term and continuously, then by all means be there. But what I want to offer you is that there is some benefit of considering that the way we think about relationships and the form of it can change and evolve, and it could bring about growth in you and a more positive feeling about relationships that comes up. So that's all I have for you this week. I'll check back with you next.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.